Hey everyone, Men from HowToPriest. So, patch 7.2 is upon us. Let's dive into what has and hasn't changed for Discipline Priest. Now, one thing that I do want to to say here before we get into any of the nitty-gritty about what happens in 7.2, I want to explain what's not happening in 7.2. A lot of people were under the assumption, based on Sigma's post, that they were going to be looking at some balance changes for Discipline. That is not happening in 7.2. That will most likely happen in 7.2.5. So with patch 7.2, we will be getting some changes to our traits, additional traits, as well as including additional points to put into our existing traits. First off, we will be putting a point into Will of the Conclave, which increases healing, absorbs, damage done, and stamina by 10%. Obviously, we put a point into that because it's a throughput increase, a big throughput increase. Next, we'll go over and add actually a point to Confession. Because of the fact that Penance is a large portion of our healing throughput, it's a better choice to put a point into than Lenience's Reward. Lenience's Reward will be our third trait that we'll put points into, and this will apply a 2%, once you have all the points in it, 2% damage reduction to our atonement targets. So good for tanks and before raid-wide AoE when we have a lot of atonements out. This will actually be a really good talent to have, or trait to have rather. Tyranny Pain is the next point we'll put our point into, or point we'll put into our artifact. Pain Suppression will also heal the target for 33% of the damage taken during pain suppression. It's a nice bonus. It's not really going to affect your playstyle at all. You'll still use pain suppression when it's needed. It just adds a little bit of throughput to it. And then lastly, we'll be putting a point into our Aegis of Wrath. This will actually improve our power word shield by 50%, but the target will take 3% of the remaining absorb as shadow damage every 1 second. So what that means is the shield will decay. If it's not being used and it doesn't get absorbed, it will absorb itself. That's essentially all that means. I'll actually put up a different image that will show you the rest of the points and priority to put those into, but this is the majority of what you'd want to do day one or working your way through after getting your 35th point into your Forbidden Flame talent. So here's the image of the next points that you'd want to put into your artifact. After you put a point into Aegis of Wrath, you'll put a point into the Edge of Dark and Light, which is your Shadow Word pain damage, and Purge the Wicked damage. Then Shield of Faith, Burst of Light, Borrowed Time, Doomsayer, Vestments of Discipline, Darkest Shadows, Pain is in Your Mind, and then lastly, you'll just continue to put points into your Concordance of the Legion Fall, which is our new Paragon artifact trait. So this leads us into our legendary ranking. So there were really only actually two legendaries that did change in patch 7.2. The rest remained unchanged, but the fact that those two did change did shake up the legendary rankings a little bit. So getting right into it, the S tier is Velen's Future Sight. Yes, it has its own tier because it is brokenly overpowered for Discipline Priest. The on-use is extremely powerful. It increases your healing by 15% and causes 50% of the overhealing on players to be redistributed to 3 nearby injured allies for 10 seconds. And it's got a short cooldown. It's really powerful. You'd want to use this for Light's Wrath and Shadow Fiend. It's also mana savings because you don't have to get as many atonements out. You only have to really get about 12 atonements in a 20-man raid to get maximum benefit out of it, so great trinket. A tier is Zalen's and Pridaz. These are both survivability legendaries, but they are also the highest throughput legendaries for Discipline. Zalen's is the gloves, and it will apply, essentially keeps an atonement on you the entire raid, which is very good for self-healing. Pridaz puts a shield on you every 30 seconds, 25% of your maximum health, and that lasts for 30 seconds, so basically just auto-refreshes during the encounter. If you take damage in a raid, this will benefit you, and it actually counts towards your healing, so it is a throughput increase because it is an absorb. Also note, our Paragon trait affects all absorbs, including Pride As, and including the Cake Trinket. Just a little side note. B tier legendaries are the Helm. This reduces mana costs of damaging abilities by 75% for 1 second per atonement that you had out when you cast Light's Wrath. So if you have, let's say, 15 plus atonements out, which you should for Light's Wrath, you're going to benefit for about 15 to 20 seconds of reduced mana costs for your damaging abilities, which means you can cast more powered radiances and what have you. So good Helm, mana savings. Bracers, these actually used to be bottom tier. The tooltip's not updated yet. The current bracers pre 7.2, and this video is being made the Monday before patch day, so that's why this isn't updated yet. The current bracers have decent stats and have an equip that Power Word Shield reduces the remaining cooldown on pain suppression by 4 seconds. That's a terrible legendary right now, but the additional equip that they have on there now is it increase with 7.2 rather tomorrow will increase the power of your Power Word Shield by 15%, which makes it a lot better because we use Power Word Shield a lot, and it's now actually pretty decent legendary. So next is Cephas' Secret. Excuse me. Before, this was the bad ring. It was very situational. It was pretty good on fights where there was dispels. What it did was it gave you a 70% increased movement speed, 25% increased haste for 10 seconds, and could be used every 30 seconds. And it would apply the equip would actually proc based off of loss of control effect to an enemy, interrupting an enemy, or dispelling any target. Which basically for us meant any loss of control effects, fear, shackle, stuff like that, would proc that, and as well as dispel. So any dispel heavy fight was typically how you proc this. That is still the case in 7.2. However, it now has a passive 10% movement speed and 2% haste without having to proc anything. That boosts it up quite a bit. Which brought it from being a lower tier legendary and situationally good to being good all the time and situationally really good. So on fights like High Botanist, it's probably going to be up there in the A tier with Xalens and Pride As. The C tier I'll kind of blow through real quickly. It's not very, there's not really a whole lot to say about them. They're all mostly traps for newer players, it seems like, which is unfortunate. Nero Band of Promises, or as I like to call it, Nero Band of Broken Promises. This ring seems like it has a lot of power to it because anybody in your barrier will get your penance on, when you cast penance, it will essentially act as atonement on anyone within your power word barrier. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of situations where your whole raid's stacked in it, so that's a thing. So it just makes it not that great. It's situationally meh. Most of the time you're not going to find a use for it, but there are probably 1 or 2 fights you may end up finding a use for it, so it's not terrible in that situation, but really it's pretty much at the bottom of the barrel. Next to the Smite Machine belt, queue up your bot commands, Discord people. This belt, Smite has a chance to reduce the to reset the remaining cooldown of your penance, 30% chance. When you cast Smite, you wouldn't cast Smite anymore using this. You'd still use it as a effective heal, so anyone with atonement that is taking damage, you'd cast Smite to heal them. That still wouldn't change. The problem is this entices newer players into spamming Smite to fish for the extra penance procs, which is not how it should be used. It should just be used as a, I got a nice little bonus because this procced. So in that case, it also still makes it a not that great throughput increase. So it's not that great of a legendary comparative to the other ones above it. So Estel in raids is very situational. It does increase your haste for a short period of time when you're under 5 atonements, which is okay, I guess. it's just too situational. There are ways you can kind of cheese the effect a little bit, but even if you cheese it, it's not that great of a legendary. Norganon's decent boots on fights where there is not a lot of mobility, or there's not a lot of movement, so where you can stand still for a period of time and get this to proc and then move. That's great. It doesn't actually always happen on a lot of fights. There are a lot of very heavy movement fights, and you can't get this to proc a lot, so it's situational. It could probably boost up to a B tier if the circumstances are right, but just for the sake of talking about it now in a very general setting, or the most common setting, which is a heavy movement encounter, it's not going to be really worth using. This wraps up the changes for Disc in patch 7.2. As always, thanks for watching.